Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm here today to talk to you about Process Lasso. This video started as a investigation of sorts into how to set Microsoft Flight Simulator to run as high priority in the easiest way possible. There are two ways I've seen of doing it, one of which is simply to do so manually in Task Manager every time you start the sim. Of course, the downside of that is you could potentially forget it. And the other way to do it is by using a registry edit. Registry editing is something I've used in the past with DLSS tweaks. The only problem with this particular implementation is there is no automated way to do it. With the DLSS tweaks file, the developer provided a executable that would do the registry edit for you, and there was also a second one that would undo the registry edit for you if you wanted to do that. There is not one available to do this for the high priority process. The alternative, of course, is doing it manually. I don't like editing my registry manually, and I certainly don't want to ask anybody else to do so, particularly people who aren't, super computer savvy. Because if you do something wrong, there is the potential to completely ruin your computer, and I don't want to take responsibility for that. So I was looking for a simple way to do this, and Process Lasso came up. It's something I've seen before, something I've known about, but it's not something I've ever really looked into. So Process Lasso can do this task of making Microsoft Flight Simulator run at high priority, but can also do some really cool other things, managing our CPUs and managing our RAM use. And it's basically an advanced task manager. It's very similar to task manager. The only difference is, or the big difference is with between task manager and process lasso, is that in process lasso you can save profiles. So you can do a lot of the things in your normal Windows task manager that you can do in process lasso. The only thing is you can't save them. You can't save a profile, you can't save your settings. So you have to do them again every time, as I was talking about earlier with the running Microsoft Flight Simulator as high priority. With Process Lasso, you can set this stuff up and it will do it for you every time you start the sim, which is fantastic. So we're going to go into and look at some pretty basic features of Process Lasso that are going to do some really great things for us in Microsoft Flight Simulator. A couple other things about Process Lasso. First of all, I'll put the link in the description for you to download it. There is a free version. There is a paid version. I use the free version. I don't think there are any settings or anything that we need the paid version for. And also, Process Lasso is very well known, and it's trusted. It's safe. Now, let me talk really briefly about profiles. Profiles are ways of saving your settings in Process Lasso. If you come up here to File and come down here to Config Profile, you're going to see a list of the profiles that you have saved. When you first open Process Lasso, it's only going to have the My First profile listed. And any changes that you make are automatically going to be saved to the profile you have open, which in your case, if you don't save a new profile, is going to be the My First profile. The one thing you want to bear in mind, if you create a new profile, if you click on Create Config Profile and give it a new name, whatever you want to give it, you can see here I've got a couple set up already. I have MSFS, MSFS v2, test2, etc. If you give a new name to your config profile, it will automatically save all of the settings that you have in your current profile to the new one. So it doesn't give you a clean profile to work with. So just bear that in mind. If you're only using this for Microsoft Flight Simulator, there's probably no reason why you would have to create a different profile. The other thing is, if you're using this for other games, you can use these same settings for other games. The only reason you might have to create a new profile, if you want to do some experimenting, you want to make some changes and see how they affect your performance, save them to a new profile and then test that one. And if you don't like it, you can go back to your previous profile. So here we are in Process Lasso. As you can see, it looks a lot like your task manager. And at the top left here, you can see your processor use, your PC responsiveness, and your memory load. Now, the first thing we want to do is come here to Main, come to the selection of Probalance Enabled, and click on that. And now you can see here, 0 Probalance events, 0 today, profile, clean. We'll get into profiles and Probalance events here shortly. So now what we want to do is go to active processes. Now you want to open Process Lasso before you open Flight Simulator. That's number one. So if we come here and if you filter by memory use, Flight Simulator will stay at the top and it just makes it easier to manipulate because you can see things are moving around as their memory use changes and as priority changes, etc. So you want to just filter by memory and then Microsoft Flight Simulator will stay at the top. So the first thing we want to do is right-click on the line for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, CPU priority, we don't want to make any changes because we want Process Lasso and Probalance to manage this for us. What Probalance is what used to be called game mode in Process Lasso. Now, when Probalance is running, it's automatically going to prioritize any game that you have running on your system. So if you want to see what settings are currently being used for any of these drop-down list menus here, come to current and it'll show you what is currently being used for that particular setting. If you go to always, you can select a setting to have Process Lasso apply always, but we don't want to do that with CPU priority. Again, we want Process Lasso to manage that for us. Now let's look at CPU affinity. Now we want to come here to always and click on CPU affinity, and you'll see that all of my CPU cores are selected. We have two types of CPU cores on Intel processors. We have P cores or performance cores, and we also have E cores, which are your efficiency cores. We don't want Microsoft Flight Simulator running on the efficiency cores. We want it running on the performance cores. So if you click here on P cores, it will select all of the performance cores that you have on your CPU. The next thing that we want to do, we want to make sure to deselect CPU 0. CPU 0 is the CPU, the core that Windows runs on, and we don't want Microsoft Flight Simulator running on the same core that is running the Windows core processes. So we deselect that, and that ensures that Microsoft Flight Simulator is going to run on the other cores that you have, the other performance cores that you have that are not running Windows. Click OK, and that is saved. And then you come here again and right-click on I/O priority. Here on always, you select high. One of the other things we can do with Process Lasso is deprioritize other things that are running while we're running our simulator that we don't want taking up extra memory or that we don't want on the same cores, running on the same PC cores, CPU cores that Microsoft Flight Simulator is running on. So for example, if you're running Little Nav Map is set at normal priority, but we don't really need it at that priority. We can have that at below normal. And what happens when you set something to a below normal priority, you may notice a little bit of lag in whatever piece of software that you're using. I will open Little Nav Map now and show you. So I've set it to below normal priority, and as you can see, I can still move around in it. I can still use it. Might take a little bit longer, a split second longer than it normally would take to work, but it's no big deal. Now, if we come back here to Process Lasso, the other thing we can do is have Process Lasso prioritize running things like Little Nav Map on different CPU cores than Microsoft Flight Simulator is running on. We talked earlier about CPU affinity. CPU affinity forces your CPU to use certain cores for certain processes. CPU sets basically requests that your CPU uses certain cores for a process, but doesn't require it, if that makes sense. So you're basically asking your CPU, could you please run this on these cores if possible? And so if you come in here into CPU sets and come down here to always, and what we want to do is we want to ask it to prioritize running little navmap on the E cores, the efficiency cores. And as you know, we've got Microsoft Flight Simulator running on cores 1 through 7. Now, you may ask also, why is it core 0 through core 7 when I have 8 performance cores? For some reason, rather than core 1 through core 8, they use core 0 through core 7. I'm sure somebody knows the reason why. I don't. So we're going to set the CPU sets to the E cores by clicking E cores and then click OK. And you can see here in CPU sets, now your system is going to try to use CPU's the efficiency cores to run little navmap. Now you can do this with other things that you have too. For example, you can do this with your browser, Firefox. Right click, CPU sets, E-cores, save. And that's going to try to run Firefox on my E-cores when it can. Another thing you can do, like for Discord, for example, if you run Discord, unless you're streaming video on Discord, you don't need it running at a high level, high priority. You can do the same thing. You can come here to CPU priority, always and below normal. And then you can also, they keep moving around, they're hard to click on. You can right click on Discord, come here to CPU sets like we did with little navmap, click on always, and then E-cores and OK. One of the cool things about Process Lasso is these settings are only going to be used when Process Lasso is open. So in other words, when you close Process Lasso, when you close out of the sim, you're not simming anymore. All of these settings to the other programs that you use, Discord, your browser, whatever, are going to go back to their normal state. So another thing, if you listen to music, for example, while you're flight simming, something like Spotify, do the same thing. Set Spotify to below normal priority and set it to your E-cores. And then your Spotify won't take up as much system resources as it normally would while you're simming. And that's all we're going to do for our CPU. The other thing Process Lasso can do is manage your RAM. And in order to demonstrate that, I'm going to take you now to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. But before we go to Chicago, let's talk briefly about Smart Trim. Smart Trim is the RAM management portion of Process Lasso. In order to look at the options, first of all, you can see here it says memory load. So it's always going to give you your memory load, how much RAM is being used. Right now, 45%. If we go here to options and we come down to memory, we come over here to Smart Trim options. This is the button to enable Smart Trim. And what it does is it checks every 15 minutes to see what your memory usage is and then trims it based on the options that you select here. So if we select trim working sets, and that's going to trim the memory of whatever your computer is doing, trim the memory of the processes for whatever your computer is doing. These are obviously the default values. The first one is never act unless RAM load is greater than a certain percentage. The default value is 65%. And that's pretty good because that makes sure that you've got, basically a third of your memory free. It's going to make sure that when you exceed basically 2/3 of your memory use, your RAM use, then it's going to act and reduce that RAM use. And of course, RAM is very, very important for Microsoft Flight Simulator. The other thing we want to do is select Purge Standby List. The standby list, I don't profess to be able to explain this the way a computer science professor would, but the standby list in your RAM are programs that have been recently used, and they're stored there kind of as a cache in a way, so that if you open those programs again, they will quickly be able to run at their normal performance level. And so one of the things that happens is this standby list can build up in your RAM and can take up some of the RAM that you want to be using for other things. So if we clear that standby list, purge the standby list, that's going to give you some extra RAM for performance. So we want to select that as well. So you want to click all of these things. The demonstration I'm about to show you in Chicago using SmartTrim was filmed earlier. And the reason is, in order to get it to work, you have to get your RAM usage up above 65%. So I had to, as you're going to see, I had to turn on a whole bunch of programs on my computer and run a lot of things to get my RAM usage above that 65%. And when I did that and I enable SmartTrim, as you're going to see in the clip coming up, SmartTrim does its thing, reduces the memory usage, the RAM usage beautifully. It does a really, really good job. So we want to have these settings, enable SmartTrim, trim working sets, purge standby list, and then just click OK. So if there's any discontinuity between what I've just shown you in the settings and what I'm going to show you in the video coming up, please excuse that. It's just the fact that I've done this in a different order because I had to in order to get SmartTrim to work. So the last thing that we want to do with SmartTrim is go here into Options again, Memory again, and we want to look at SmartTrim Exclusions. And you want to type flight simulator.exe and add it. And that's going to make sure that SmartTrim does not trim the RAM usage of Flight Simulator, because obviously we don't want it to do that. I don't think it would, because Flight Simulator is the program that it is prioritizing over all others. But just to be sure, let's add it to the SmartTrim exclusions list. And the other thing we can do is add it to the Probalance exclusions list by going to CPU Probalance, and you come down here to configure exclusions. And again, flight, if I can type it, flight simulator.exe, add, and OK. And now let's go to Chicago. So here we are in Chicago O'Hare. I have live traffic enabled. I have deliveries all running. I have Real Environment X running. And as you can see from looking at this list, I literally have everything running that I could on my computer to try and get us over that 65% threshold for Process Lasso. Now, I've got OBS Studio, I've got Adobe Premiere, I've got Navigraph charts, I've got everything running. And you can see my memory, it's actually come down a little bit, my memory use, my RAM use, but it's now at 71%. So just a little while ago, it was actually at 75%. So now let's open up Process Lasso and watch it do its thing. So as you can see here, it shows you responsiveness, which I've talked about. It shows you the memory load, 70% here. And we're back here in the active processes. And so what we're going to do now, first of all, what we're going to do now is go inside the cockpit so there's not as much noise. But what we're going to do now is enable SmartTrim. Then we come over here and click Trim Now. And watch. And as you can see, we started at 71%, and now we're at 56%, and it's still going down, 55%. And you can see here on the graph as well, that bluish purple line there is the memory usage, the memory load, and now we're at 52%. So even I haven't even closed anything. So even with all this stuff running, which normally I wouldn't have any of it running, basically when I'm using Microsoft Flight Simulator, except perhaps Real Environment X and Navigraph charts, which aren't big memory users, but everything else I've got running, and we are still getting, now with Process Lasso, we're now getting 53% memory load, which is way lower, obviously, than what we had prior to enabling Process Lasso. So I would encourage you guys to give Process Lasso a try. Very simple to install, very simple to set up, and it can do a whole lot of things for you. We've really only scratched the surface of what it can do, but it can do a lot in terms of memory management and CPU management. And some people have found absolutely enormous differences in their performance with this program. So I would appreciate if you guys let me know in the comments how this works for you if you give it a try. And I hope everybody's having a great day.